Hello everybody, I'm Lisa.
And I'm Nick.
And welcome to It Takes Two, a podcast where two people watch two movies that have the same plot or premise and then discuss them.
And this week we watched The Great Escape and Chicken Run.
Yeah.
Because this is episode 5, and every 5 episodes we're doing something that's a little bit different.
Yeah. No, I mean,
similar premise, but different.
Yeah, I mean, definitely similar premise.
Very similar.
Definitely not twin films, because The Great Escape was released in 1963
63.
and Chicken Run was the year 2000.
Yeah, a little bit of a gap there.
Yeah, just a little bit of a
I
gap.
think World War II ended somewhere between that time and before that. Before that!
Hello. Do you know history?
Yeah.
Yes, World War II had ended significantly before The Great Escape was released.
But it is set in World War II. And then from the opening sequence of Chicken Run, it's clearly copied heavily.
Yeah, so there's a lot of references to The Great Escape in Chicken Run, but probably the biggest one is how the chicken coops are laid out.
Yeah.
Which is obviously very directly inspired by the prison camp in The Great Escape.
The whole POW thing was very interesting from a chicken point of view, but obviously we're digressing because we're just talking about the similarity. Well, the similarities are the main purpose.
Yeah, that's the point. That's why we've chosen these two movies.
Yeah.
Is that they are very similar.
Yeah.
There are big differences though as well. Chicken Run is not a Great Escape remake.
No.
But there are definitely similarities.
It's just the premise of The Great Escape, except with claymation chickens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, one of the big things off the bat is that obviously in Chicken Run, those chickens have been in captivity their whole lives, whereas in The Great Escape, it opens with them being brought into the prison camp.
Yeah, it's I hadn't seen either of these two movies.
Yes, this is the rare case where I'd seen them both and you hadn't seen either.
Yeah, which I don't know how often that will be.
Yeah.
But no. But no, it was very interesting. Like, I've got very little notes for The Great Escape because I was enjoying the movie so much, which I think, in comparison to movies I've seen, except for Gordy, where I had like almost 2 pages, it was easy to just get lost in the movie and just continue enjoying it.
Yeah.
So the massive similarities I noticed just in the beginning. So Ginger, who's like the lead chicken. Mm-hmm. And Steve McQueen are sort of like the two characters.
Virgil Hilts.
Yeah, because they play Captain Virgil Hilts. He's the cooler king in The Great Escape, and Ginger keeps going in the coal box.
Yeah, the solitary confinement, and she does the bouncing ball.
But she's doing it with a Brussels sprout.
Yeah. But I mean, that is a direct homage to Steve McQueen.
But it's funny because now looking back, the amount of other references to The Great Escape that are in, the one that sticks out to me is the episode where Maggie goes to daycare.
Right.
And it's the same premise. Like, they come up with a plan and then she ends up being stuck in the box.
Right.
And having to bounce a ball.
Well, The Great Escape is referenced everywhere. Like, it's one of those real classic movies that gets a lot of references.
It's funny because I think a majority of the movie that stood out as being the theme, the cooler, the planning.
Yeah.
I've kind of learnt the plot through osmosis.
Yeah.
Through just popular culture, which is interesting for me because I'm pretty sure. So I'm going to jump forward a bit here just for sake of my mental health. There's a scene where they crashed the stolen plane.
Yeah.
That wasn't referenced in any... Has that been referenced in other things?
Probably. I'm not sure.
Because it just seems so familiar, and I'm 90% sure that I hadn't seen The Great Escape before.
Yeah.
Maybe I caught the end of it at some point in the past.
Yeah, that is quite near the end. Or, like you said, it could have been referenced somewhere because The Great Escape as a whole is very highly referenced throughout pop culture. So
just that sequence. Anyway, the American rooster who's played by Mel Gibson, Rocky. There's the Americans, because I was looking through on the trivia, which is normally what you do.
Yeah. Did you do some? You looked through some trivia?
I looked through some trivia when I was talking about the changes to the historical event.
Right.
The historical accuracy of The Great Escape.
Yeah.
and there was more emphasis put on the Americans in the movie to appeal to the American audience.
One of the things, the big things about it is that in the actual events, none of the Americans escaped.
Yeah.
Because the American troops were approaching that area, and the Germans were afraid that the Americans they had imprisoned would help their troops, so they moved them to a separate camp a week before the escape was due to happen.
Interesting.
So none of the Americans who were there actually escaped.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously you have Steve McQueen and James Garner both escape in the movie.
Because there's a lot of emphasis put on the American characters in The Great Escape, and it's also the main premise of how they escape through in Chicken Run, because without Rocky, they wouldn't have been able to do it.
Though it's interesting because obviously in Chicken Run a big thing is that Rocky actually doesn't know how to escape.
Yeah.
And also doesn't want to help him escape. Yeah. He's just kind of winging it. Until Ginger finds out. And that sequence, I know we're all over the place in terms of chronological order here, but it doesn't really matter. That sequence where she finds the lower half of the poster is so dark.
Yeah.
It's like they cut all the diegetic sounds so you can't hear the other chickens talk even though you can see them, and they just have it like Ginger's POV as she's walking through and everyone looking at her like, obviously you can't see what's on her face, but it's so much that everyone else is just stopping what they're doing.
Yeah.
And there's just this really solemn music. And then she like puts the bottom of the poster on where you see that he can't actually fly, he's shot out of a cannon, and thunder and lightning strikes and the music gets real dramatic. It's so dark. I feel like weirdly enough, I feel like Chicken Run is a darker movie than The Great Escape. I think The Great Escape takes it very lightly.
In aspects, yeah, because there's quite a levity to the situation they're in. There's 250 plus prisoners of, I was going to say POVs, but there's not.
Oh, POWs. That's because I said Ginger's POV.
Yeah. POWs in this camp who are all people who have escaped prison camps before.
Yeah, that's the big thing about the Great Escape, is that it's all the people who have previously escaped or made escape attempts in other prison camps have all been brought into the one place.
There's no real time frame, like a looming time in The Great Escape versus Chicken Run, which they have constructed this pie machine.
Yep.
Which is pretty dark when you think of an entire live chicken going into industrial machine to come out as a hot baked pie on the other end.
So that is actually based on Nick Park, who's the writer director of a lot of that Aardman stuff. He owned pet chickens as a child named Ginger and Rocky, which is where those two names come from.
Interesting.
But then as a teenager, he worked in a chicken processing factory.
Ugh.
So the idea for that machine came from the machines he used to work in. So he used to put the chickens, strap them by their feet into the machine like it happens in the movie. So a lot of that is from his experience actually working in that industry, which is interesting and quite dark in itself because he makes it very dark.
Yeah, there are certain aspects of that movie which are interestingly adult for a movie that's clearly aimed at children.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a few times where I was just like, wow, how'd they get away with it? Like, new kids' movies these days just seem to have no negative, like, real-world sort of aspects to it. Like, Pixar are doing their best, but even their movies are getting a little polished, if that's the word I use. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, they are owned by Disney, and I guess Disney wants things a little bit like that. Though they're letting some of the Marvel stuff go to dark places, but I feel like Disney are trying to keep their dark stuff in series format rather than a movie format.
The other reference that I got from Chicken Run was Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Which is when they escape the pie machine.
And she grabs her hat from under it.
Yeah, the door slowly closing.
Yeah. There's a lot of references on it. It references, a whole bunch of different movies, and a lot of those kind of movies when people are in adventure situations or escape situations and stuff, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely, it's very heavy on the pop culture references, and it's quite a bit of comedy in it, but I do feel like it goes to really dark places.
Yeah, just a few times.
Whereas I feel like The Great Escape keeps it all very lighthearted until towards the end, and then that scene, I know we've already had spoilers ready, but I'm going to say proper massive spoilers. the scene where they're bringing the guys back to the camp and they let them go out to, you know, have a break.
Yeah.
And then they just line them up and shoot them all. I think that's like the turning point. Because, I mean, even parts before that where they're chasing them and stuff like that, they still keep little bits of comedy aspects to it in parts. But at that point, you just go like, wow, this is brutal. Yeah. Though I think for me as an Irish person as well, it was very reminiscent of Irish history when we had our 1916 rebellion. What the British soldiers did was they got all the leaders of the rebellion and lined them up and just shot them all in a line, including a guy in a wheelchair. Because they were like, you think you can rebel? This is what happens when you rebel.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty much the same message they were giving to those soldiers.
Yeah, it was it's interesting as a movie because normally, especially these days when you see war movies, they're very happy ending. You know, they're always picking a story with a happier ending.
Yeah, a lot of them are very, you know, dark in the middle and then happy at the end. Yeah. Whereas this is, you know, quite lighthearted. I mean, especially Steve McQueen's character, he keep trying to escape and coming back and stuff.
Yeah.
And then in the end, it's just nope.
Because his mate that he kept going to the boiler with was Scottish, wasn't he?
Yeah, Ives.
Ives, who's also reflected in Chicken Run as the one Scottish chicken.
No, because here's the thing, there is a second Scottish person in The Great Escape who is, what do they call him at the end? They don't call him the brains, they call him the intelligence.
Yeah.
In the credits. He's referred to as the intelligence, and his name is Mac. And the chicken, who's the brains in Chicken Run, is a Scottish chicken named Mac. Oh. So I think she's a direct reference to him. But probably because they only have the one Scottish chicken, and she might be doing both because she is also the kind of right-hand man to Ginger, which is what Ives is to Hiltz.
Yeah. Just that sequence where he's just like, they find out that they're not going to get out, and he just loses his shit.
Yeah.
And just commits suicide by trying to climb out. Like in the middle of the day with no planning, like in a huge crowd.
Yeah, he's like, I'm just going to walk out of here on the 4th of July when they're celebrating their 4th of July stuff.
Yeah. It's, if you haven't seen it, obviously there's a lot of spoilers that have just happened, but as a movie that I'd learned most of the major plot points through osmosis, and sort of the references through osmosis through pop culture, it's still worth watching. Like, I have 8 lines about that movie. Because I was just so engrossed the entire time. And it's a long
it's like, it is about 3 hours long, I think, the runtime. Yeah. It's about 3 hours long, but you're enthralled for the whole time.
Yeah. There's lots of little ingenious things, and they explain it to you without being like, here, dum-dum, here's the answer.
Yeah.
And some of the things that the prisons are doing to cover up their work is fantastic.
Yeah, and even the fact that they let Steve McQueen, let Hiltz and Ives do their fake escapes that they know aren't going to work. They let them do that because they say, well, if none of us are trying to escape, or if we try to stop all escape attempts, they're going to start wondering what we're planning.
Yeah.
And they're going to start looking for tunnels.
I just love it. They get into the camp for the first time when they get dropped off.
Yeah.
And a couple of them pretend to be Russian woodsmen.
Yeah.
Some of them just jump straight into the back of trucks that have got like tree branches and debris. And they're just like...
Yeah, immediately, day one, about 10 of them try to escape.
Yeah, even the gates are just shut, and they're just like, all right, let's get out of here.
Yeah, and Steve McQueen's like, oh, I found the blind spot already, and it's, you know...
Yeah, it's quite... They're obviously very skilled at escaping.
Yeah.
That's why they were there.
Yeah.
But I like the fact that it was shown rather than told. Because they do tell you a little bit, that, like, the colonel who's in charge of the camps going over, like, you know, 17 escapes, 18 escapes, you know, talking to the officer whose fouls is based on the stiff upper lip British officer with his cane. Yeah, Fowler is very much based on that guy, like 100%. I think all the characters in Chicken Run have references to
Yeah.
the actual characters from Great Escape, except it's just way more over the top.
Yeah, and I think they're not. I think they're amalgamations of some of them.
Yeah, they're amalgamations in there.
And some of them are separated. So I feel like Rocky and Ginger are both Virgil Hilts.
Yeah.
I think they're both him, but different aspects of him. Because Rocky obviously is the one who gets to escape and then comes back, which is what Hilts does in The Great Escape. He leaves and maps out the area and comes back. But Ginger is the one who's doing the plans over and over and over again and getting caught over and over again and going into the cooler. So I think they both have an element of him in them.
Yeah. There's also like the cartoonishness of the characters. Where there's a lot of characters in The Great Escape.
Yes,
and
I was trying to make
famous actors.
Yeah, I was trying to make notes of people's names and who they were so I could remember them, but I gave up halfway through because there's way too many.
Yeah, and it's just interesting seeing so many actors that are super famous that I didn't grow up with because it's sort of outside of my generation's era, all in one movie, and it's like, oh my god, this is the I don't know what you'd call it. What's an equivalent? The Avengers. Yeah,
kind of. I mean, there was also Magnificent Seven, which I think is the same director, and The Towering Inferno. All three of those movies had quite similar casts. I think they're all Steve McQueen movies. I think The Magnificent Seven has James Garner in it and a couple other people from Great Escape.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of those kind of ensemble casts back then. But I mean, The Great Escape is quite an ensemble cast. Because they're all very famous.
Unless you're printing money like Disney were with the Marvel movies.
Yeah.
It'd be very expensive to do that kind of thing these days.
Yeah.
Like even I'll take another franchise that's been running for way too long. The Fast and Furious franchise. And those later movies, like, they're not all A-list celebrities doing it. It's like, they've been sort of incorporated within an episode or two of their series.
Yeah.
And then coming together for whatever. I haven't even seen the last 3, probably. But, it'd be so expensive to do that these days.
But what I would think about as equivalent of is, because a lot of these actors are actors that I grew up with as old men in things, playing old men and stuff. I feel like it would be the equivalent of the cast of, what are they called, Red, where it's like, is that the one that's got like Bruce Willis and John Malkovich or whatever, and like a whole...
Yeah.
It would be like if that cast had got together for an ensemble film in the 70s or 80s.
Yeah.
Like, that would be insane. To have all those people in one ensemble cast back in, when they were in their heyday as like in their 30s or 40s, quite, young people.
Because if you're talking like nowadays, most male leads get paid like $15 million a movie. So you imagine having that much talent on screen and having to keep them in situations where, they're not comfortable. Like, I don't know about health and safety in movies from that era. I know there was a lot of stuff that they changed.
Yeah.
I think Ben-Hur was pretty bad. And what was the other one that was really bad? There were quite a few war movies where they were literally just blowing horses up.
Yeah.
But the scenes where he kept getting accidentally buried, like unless...
Do you know what's really scary about that? Charles Bronson, who plays that character, he gave them a lot of the ideas for how to get dirt out because he used to be a coal miner. But from his time as a coal miner, he had extreme claustrophobia. Well,
it makes sense because it's sort of his character.
Yeah. But I mean, he's in there and he has extreme claustrophobia and they keep burying him in dirt in a tunnel. Like, that's commitment.
Yeah.
That is so scary.
It's very visceral as well because it's not CG shots like you'd get these days.
Yeah.
They're literally crawling in a tunnel. And I obviously there might be, depending on how they were filming it, either the tunnel was really wide and then
probably
open as a soundstage with a railed dolly for the camera. But you're up close and personal. Like, you're watching them get, like, that moment where they're digging and then they hear, like, the loose dirt moving.
Yeah.
And literally just cover their heads thinking they're going to die now. And it just pours on them and it's just their feet kicking out the bottom of it.
And it's, presumably controlled falls of dirt and it's all planned, but you can't plan for it exactly. And I mean, you have a man in there who's genuinely severely claustrophobic, and he's in there, and he has to trust that you're going to control this or you're going to get him out as fast as possible.
Yeah, there was some fantastic cinematography in Great Escape. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, especially for its time, you know?
Yeah.
That's really well done.
It's just, I find the whole movie interesting, because you've got all the pop culture references that have come into our culture through osmosis.
Yep.
And you've got just this massive ensemble cast. And apparently, so there's this end sequence where Steve McQueen's character is escaping, and he's got a German motorcycle, and he's trying to jump the border wall into Switzerland.
Yep.
Apparently that stunt is one of the greatest stunts of all time, because it was just done.
Yeah. He couldn't do it. He injured himself trying it.
Yeah.
So they got a stuntman in. But what's funny about that to me is that apparently Steve McQueen... I've literally got a list on here where I've shortened down a whole bunch of the trivia, because so much of the IMDb trivia for The Great Escape is just ways that Steve McQueen was a dick. So I've just written down Steve McQueen sounds like a dick, and then I've got a whole list of them. So number 1 on that list is that he only agreed to do the movie on the condition that they write in scenes for him where he could show off his motorcycle skills. So there was never any motorcycles planned to be in the movie, and Steve McQueen was like, I'll do your movie if you let me drive a motorcycle in it. And then they have this motorcycle stunt, and he failed doing it, and they had to get the stunt driver to do it.
Yeah, I tell you what though, because old motorbikes were big, heavy, and slow. They didn't have a lot of, they're not like these days where everything's made by lasers and computers. Yeah. They were hand turned and stuff, especially during the wartime. Like everything was machine made, but like putting together engines and stuff was a big deal.
Yep.
What's the easiest word? Agility that he has on the motorbike is really, really good.
Yeah.
Because you see him doing those really sharp turns, because the chase sequence in between.
And those are, as far as I'm aware, those are all Steve McQueen. It's just the jump that they have a stunt driver for.
Interesting.
He also insisted that they rewrite the script to give his character more to do. He wears a gold medallion in the film, which is a gift his wife gave him that he refused to take off. He wouldn't mingle with the cast. He rented a home for himself, and he got driven to set in a limousine every day.
Wow.
He was arrested and jailed for speeding while the film was in production.
Joy.
And Richard Attenborough said that working with Steve McQueen was one of the toughest challenges he's ever faced in his life.
Wow.
So that says a lot about Steve McQueen.
I guess a lot of actors back in the day was massive. Well, even these days are massive divas.
Oh, absolutely. But I just thought it was so funny. I was like, well, because I'm scrolling through. There's a lot of stuff on there. But it's funny how much of it is just Steve McQueen did this thing that made him a dick. Steve McQueen did it. And it's like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
A lot of the other stuff was just facts about the actual story, which you were saying you went through.
Yeah.
And then facts about the cast, because I think 5 cast members had actually been prisoners of war.
Yeah.
And one in particular was what is his name? I've written it down somewhere here. Donald Pleasance, who played Colin Blythe, the forger, the guy who goes blind towards the end of the film. He was such a nice guy in that movie. He's like the one that you're rooting for, so I'm really sad that he dies in it, because he's like, of all of them, he's the one that I want to escape and get to go see his family.
Yeah, it's such a like a kind of, it's a kick in the teeth sequence too.
Yeah.
Because they crash the plane, and they're not in Switzerland. They're not over the border.
Yeah.
They didn't make it.
They're 20 minutes short of the border.
Yeah, and then he gets out, he can't see past his nose.
Yeah.
And he just turns around to look at his friend.
And he gets shot in the back.
Shot in the back, and he just holds him as he dies. Like, all the German soldiers are just pointing machine guns at him.
So upsetting. But anyway, the actor, Donald Pleasance, had made suggestions to the director about things to make things a little bit more historically accurate, and the director told him to go away and mind his own business and not do things with the script when he wasn't a scriptwriter, etc. And then one of the other actors said to him, "You do realize that Donald was a prisoner of war in a German prison camp?" And he was like, "Oh." And then started consulting him and everything from then on for historical accuracy, because I think the others that were prisoners of war were in different places. I think 2 of them were prisoners of the Allies, so I don't know. Yeah, so Donald Pleasance was a prisoner of war in a German prison camp during World War II.
It's pretty harsh.
And then he went on to star in The Great Escape.
A movie where he was a prisoner of war in a German prison camp.
Because I mean, apparently James Garner, who I've seen in a whole lot of other things, apparently he, during the Korean War, had been a scrounger, which is what he plays in the movie. So he was using his own personal experience to figure out what his character would be doing.
I like that.
Yeah.
It sucks they had to go through that experience and we had that time, history, but
yeah,
it's good that people are using their extra experience to help in movies.
It's really, really interesting because it literally, obviously, because it's 1963, so it's about just over 20 years after World War II ended. And
depends on who you follow, yeah.
Okay. Roughly 20 years, say approximately 20 years after World War II ended. So a lot of these guys were teenagers, early 20s when that war was going on.
It was a full swing.
Yeah. So, and then again, James Garner was in the Korean War, so there was that as well. So it is interesting to see that, you don't quite get that nowadays.
No.
I mean, there's probably some actors who were in Iraq or Iran or one of those, Afghanistan.
Yeah. I know you hated it, but some of the characters in Generation Kill are actual Marines that were there.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting, but it's not something that you see super often, whereas obviously at that time, so many actors were people who had been, because there was conscription and stuff.
Yeah.
So, everyone had been in the war.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting because obviously then as well, one of the things about it was that the characters in the movie are all amalgamations of real people. They're not all just based solely on one person. They're based on bits and pieces of different people. So it's really interesting to see the actors bringing their real life experience into that and saying, this is what it was like to be in a prisoner of war camp in Germany.
I think this is the first time we've spent more time talking about the movie with the higher rating than the one with the lower rating. Which obviously, The Great Escape is a higher rated movie than Chicken Run.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's...
I mean, I really love Chicken Run, so I love both of these movies. I think they're both fantastic movies. But I mean, you'd never seen The Great Escape. Well, you'd never seen Chicken Run either. But...
Yeah. After watching Chicken Run, I thought there'd be more guard dogs, and because there's such a premise on the farmer's dogs, and I just thought that the guard dogs ripping prisoners apart would be in The Great Escape, but they weren't. And
no, I mean apparently that was a scene that was cut from Chicken Run, was one of the guard dogs ripping one of the chickens apart.
Yeah,
which would be brutal to watch.
I can see why that got cut out of a kid's movie.
Yeah, but yeah, it's. I guess that's their way, because they couldn't have sentries with guns in Chicken Run. I guess that's their way of having, the sentries is the guard dogs.
Yeah.
Because it makes more sense in a farm setting. Well, they did have, I think, a water tower or something that's set up that looks like the watchtower is in The Great Escape. I thought it was really, it's really fun the way they have set it up to look exactly like that prison camp. But it's, the opening scene of Chicken Run is very dark, and it's all set at night time, and it's Ginger trying to escape and being caught and stuff.
Which is funny because the opening of The Great Escape is literally just a military convoy in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
And with the theme music that everybody knows playing.
And it's so, because they both have real triumphant music playing in that intro, but the Great Escape theme, especially at that beginning, isn't. It's such a marching song. Yeah. It's got a real beat to it. Which makes sense, You
got any more trivia?
For Chicken Run, I literally only wrote down one bit of trivia, which is that Chicken Run is the reason that the Best Animated Feature was added to the Academy Awards.
Interesting.
Because people were so upset that Chicken Run didn't get nominated for a Best Picture. So the following year, they brought in Best Animated Picture to make up for it, and Trek won.
Interesting.
But people really campaigned for Chicken Run to be nominated for Best Picture. Not Best Animated Picture, Best Picture.
Well.
And then even the Academy were disappointed that it hadn't managed to make it in, which is bizarre. But it's interesting. In terms of trivia, Yeah, in terms of trivia on the Great Escape, I think we've covered it all. So it's largely about the cast members being prisoners of war, Steve McQueen being a dick, the fact that the Americans in real life didn't actually escape. The only other thing was, I thought it was funny that one of the pieces of trivia they include on IMDb for The Great Escape is the film features no female characters. Which is fun because obviously in Chicken Run, it's almost entirely female characters.
Yeah. There aren't any. And I understand that because that's, a prisoner of war movie set in World War II.
Yeah, but even when they escape, when they're like, the guys talking to the resistance in France and stuff like that and going down to Spain, it's all men.
Yeah.
No women. There's no female cast members in The Great Escape. They don't exist.
Yeah, they're just all extras when they sort of get out of the prison and trying to escape.
I don't think... Is there even any women on the train? I think there's I think you see women walking by on the streets or whatever when they're filming in the city.
I think there are a few, but now that you have made me question it.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing any women on the train, but I didn't because I obviously read this afterwards. I didn't make notes to try and count how many women appeared in the movie.
Yeah.
But I don't remember seeing any on the... Oh, I think maybe there's one on the train, maybe. But on the streets you see them walking around, I think, when Richard Attenborough is running around and trying to hide.
And the bus as well.
Right. But
and the train stop.
Yeah, if the train stopped, there's definitely women.
Yeah.
But there's no... I think they're all extras or else just real people walking by or something, but there's no cast members who are women in the whole movie. Which is funny because it's a massive ensemble cast.
Yeah.
But
That's interesting.
Yeah. But then obviously Chicken Run is... Yeah. You've got Rocky, Fowler, and Mr. Tweedy.
Yeah, and all the other characters are female.
Well, the dogs, I don't know.
Yeah.
But other than that, yeah.
They don't have any spoken
Oh,
words.
the two rats are male as well.
Oh, yeah, the two rats.
Were they Nick and someone?
Yeah. That whole sequence where he's like, oh no, I'll give you every egg I lay this month. And they're like, sweet! It's like, roosters don't lay eggs.
Yeah. It takes them to the end of the thing to go, oh, wait a second, roosters don't lay eggs.
Yeah. No, the comparisons are definitely there. It's more just using scenes and sequences from The Great Escape to populate a piece of media with, the references that everybody knows. It was definitely, I wouldn't say a copy or a remake. It's more of a homage almost.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I would describe it as an homage to The Great Escape. Yeah, it's definitely not trying to remake The Great Escape, but obviously heavily influenced by it.
Yeah.
But it is an absolutely great film on its own merit.
I always found that style of claymation of Wallace and Gromit guys kind of creepy because the animal characters look more real than the people characters.
Right.
Because the Mrs. Tweedy, such a creepy looking character.
Do you know what's really interesting about Mrs. Tweedy is that first time you see Mrs. Tweedy is in the middle of this really dark scene where there's this big escape, and the door opens and everyone is terrified, and they show her and she's in her pink nightgown with her cap on and stuff. So they're totally cutesying up, over feminizing her and stuff. And everyone is still terrified. So you go into that going if they're this scared of her when she's in her underwear looking stupid, what is she like on a normal basis? So your introduction to her is that no matter how silly she looks, everyone is still absolutely terrified of her. The chickens, the dogs, Mr. Tweedy.
Yeah. It's an interesting character.
Yeah.
Because she comes off as very... I'm not going to say the word, but she does come off as the German sort of commander in charge of the camp.
Yep.
Where even the commander of the actual camp in The Great Escape is way more lenient.
Yeah, so I think if you were to compare her to a character from The Great Escape, she's not the commander who's looking after the camp. She's the guy who...
The Gestapo guy?
The Gestapo guy who gets them all killed.
Yeah. It literally says, if you escape one more time, I'm just going to have you executed.
Yeah. Which apparently was like a charge that was taken against them after the whole thing, like in real life.
Yeah.
That was one of the charges against them, was that they shot prisoners of war.
Yeah. Because that's the whole thing, is when after World War One, and we sort of went, well, we committed a whole bunch of war crimes. Well, we've made them crimes now. Like, no one's allowed to do that anymore.
Yeah. And
there was a huge difference between, the classism, though, still existed. Like, when pilots were shot down in World War One, they were given, like, full meals, and the Red Baron was famous for that. When he shot people down, he literally invited them over to dinner.
I think a lot of the characters in The Great Escape are pilots.
Yeah. Obviously, it's a heavy on the...
Especially, I think, the Americans. Because obviously, James Garner's character is a pilot, because they steal the plane and go off. But there's a few of them are... What I found really interesting was I had read a little bit of the trivia, like, during the movie as well. And I know one of the actors who was actually a prisoner of war had been caught in the desert and had managed... He had been in plain clothes and had changed his clothes before they caught him to a uniform, because if he was wearing plain clothes, they could claim he was a spy and kill him. Yeah. And that's referenced in the movie.
It is, yeah.
They have the guy, and the Gestapo guy is like, he's like, you're wearing normal clothes, are you a spy? And the guy's like, oh no, it's my uniform, I just, had to trim it a bit and had to dye it because there was stains on it or something. Yeah. And I think it is genuinely a uniform that they've done that to. Yeah. Because that's what they were doing in the prison. But I thought that was really interesting that's, that is taken as a direct experience from one of the cast members. Yeah. And they've referenced it in the movie as, if you're a spy, I can kill you. Yeah.
I think the reference to that in Chicken Run was the circus people looking for Rocky. Yeah. Which was interesting, because it was sort of like the same sort of premise of, people turning up in the middle of the night and him being like, oh crap, and hide me,
Yeah.
It's funny when you look back at some of the animated movies from that time, and just like, wow, they could just almost borderline plagiarize stuff and just been like, yeah, cool, print money.
Well, I think it's interesting because obviously, though it was DreamWorks. DreamWorks did, I didn't even realize that until we were watching it. DreamWorks produced it. I thought it was Aardman independent, but they obviously got some DreamWorks money to get the money in. And because I was going to say Aardman didn't have the same constraints that like Disney would, but I guess DreamWorks did a little bit. But DreamWorks at the time, and DreamWorks did The Prince of Egypt, which is quite dark. Shrek gets a little bit dark places, not hugely, but Prince of Egypt gets quite dark.
I think in Shrek and the Shrek series, the majority of the dark stuff is implied rather than shown, though.
Yeah, I guess so. But then again, it's in Chicken Run, it's quite implied. But you do see the chicken that hasn't laid any eggs when they bring her in. Yeah. You get to see by shadow Mrs. Tweedy chopping her head off, which is, and it's this set up very early on that we know if these chickens don't lay eggs, they go to the chopping block, and that's what happens to them, and they know that's what happens to them. And it's not like in Babe or Gordy where they're like, oh, they've gone off somewhere, they don't want to come back.
They've gone to heaven.
Yeah, they know if we don't lay eggs, we get our heads cut off.
Yeah. Dark. Very dark.
Yeah, it's quite dark. Speaking of budgets, though, because I mentioned it, I did take down the budgets for these, but obviously there's going to be a massive difference because The Great Escape was made in 1963. Yeah. So money is different.
40 plus years. Well, less than 40 years of inflation.
Yeah. So the budget for The Great Escape was $3.8 million.
Which would have been a lot then.
And it made $11 million at box office. Chicken Run, the budget was $45 million. And it made $224.8 million at box office. That's a lot of money to bring in for a chicken movie. Yeah. Such a good movie, though. Yeah. But yeah, that is quite a whack of money to bring in.
Yeah. Because I've got nothing else to say. I'm struggling here.
It's okay.
Mainly because I just enjoyed The Great Escape so much that I just didn't write notes down. Like I wrote events that happened, but they're not really. There's no comparison. That Rocky didn't celebrate. Rocky wasn't while everybody else was digging. No, they didn't dig a tunnel. They built a plane out of a chicken coop. He didn't steal a whole bunch of potatoes and then brew moonshine to celebrate the 4th of July.
No, but he got the guys, the rats, to bring in a radio and got people to dance and stuff, which I think was their equivalent of the 4th of July scene, was the
sort of bridge. A little bridge.
Yeah.
Not a real bridge.
I don't know. I feel like if we're trying to compare scene for scene, I'm trying to figure out that the scene where they figure out that Rocky is a fake, I guess, is the closest that they have to that scene where the guys are all shot.
Yeah.
Where it's just like suddenly, this hopefulness is just gone.
Yeah.
But obviously in Chicken Run they do have a happy ending. They do eventually get out.
And they live on a chicken island with the rats.
Yeah, they've got a little chicken. They found a little bird sanctuary and found a little island on the bird sanctuary. Yeah. Living there, which is cute.
Which is also disturbing because there's only 2 males.
Yeah, I did think that. Which is something I definitely didn't notice as a child, but I did think that when we were watching it. I was like, why are there so many chicks?
Yeah.
When there's only Rocky and Fowler.
Yeah.
That's real creepy.
Yeah.
Unless they were supposed to be all Rocky and Ginger's kids, but I feel
no, that's way too many.
Or did they find
other chickens?
Yeah. Did they find other roosters? Also escaped from the circus. There's some interesting things. I took down a few little quotes from Chicken Run. It was the one I wrote down was where one of the chickens says to Ginger, "The chances of us getting out of here are 1,000,000 to 1," and she says, "Then there's still a chance."
Yeah.
I thought that's a really nice message to have in there, and it's quite inspiring.
Yeah.
Which was nice. The only thing I think the only quote I took down for The Great Escape was "It is the sworn duty of officers to try to escape."
Yeah.
That whole conversation is great because it's between the commander of the camp and the captain, who's the highest ranking officer in the actual the escapees, or the prisoners rather, and it's like a conversation where the German leader is trying to say to him, you need to keep your guys in line to make sure they don't try to escape. And then the guy's just very calming and is like, well, it's the sworn duty of these officers to try to escape.
Yeah.
And he's like, and to make your life as difficult as possible. And the guy's like, okay. And that whole conversation is quite comic, even though they're obviously saying it with very straight faces.
Yeah, the thing that I'd like to end it on, from my point of view, is for a movie that was made in the 1960s, and we are in 2021, so that is a long time ago.
Yes, almost 70 years.
It holds up.
Yes.
Because there's nothing stand out about it that it wouldn't be. Even like the cinematography is a little dated, and some of the scenes run on for a long time. And I think these days studios and directors and editors would have a little bit more punchy.
Yeah, I think
it still really holds up for a movie that's what? How many years is that?
68.
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
Yeah, no more than that. Sorry, 78.
60, 20, 40. Yeah.
Yeah, 78.
Yeah. 7.
Yeah, 78 years.
8.
That's a long time. Yeah. I think the cinematography is good. I like it as it is. I think if it was made now, it would be a much darker film. In tone, but also visibly darker. I think
because you look at the movies that had POWs. You look at the movies that were made by the inspiration of war, like the wars that happened in the 80s, and the big one that stands out is Rambo. And literally the reason that he's freaking out when the cops arrest him is because he's got PTSD from being tortured.
Yeah.
And you don't see that in The Great Escape. They're all very gentlemanly about it. And they're all even coming out of other than Ives, who's literally gone fence crazy, or I can't remember what they called it, who just commits suicide because he realises they ain't getting out that day.
Yeah.
Or, in comparison to not Rocky, damn it, Stallone. In comparison to Rambo, it's a huge difference. There's a huge difference of seeing flashes of what the characters have been through.
Yeah.
And having that dramatic holy crap, that dark parts.
It's interesting because some of the cast members had been tortured.
Yeah, but they just, it's still very stiff upper lip and...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I studied post-war cinema
Yeah.
in college. I wrote an essay on it and studied, The Third Man and things like that. The Life and Times or Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. And a lot of it from around then, so those were the movies that were made roughly between 1945 and 1950 about the war, made just post-war.
Yeah.
And they do have that same kind of air of stiff upper lip and like being, still keeping your British mannerisms. I think it was very funny that they had those American characters in there stressed because they have like a totally different mindset to the other guys. Which is like when they march up on the 4th of July with their, their moonshine on their flag or whatever, and they ask the captain or whatever he is to come have a drink with them, and he's like, "Oh yes, I'll go have a drink with you," and it's like, but it's so funny, and that the leader of the whole thing is Roger Bartlett, but like, Steve McQueen and James Garner are obviously much more charismatic.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that they use that kind of contrast in there to go like, this is what the British soldiers are like and this is what the American soldiers are like.
Yeah, definitely holds up.
Yeah. No, it's a good movie. And Chicken Run holds up. I think Chicken Run...
Yeah, well, claymation never ages. That's,
exactly.
That's the thing with CGI and even animation, depending on the frames per second.
Yeah.
Obviously, the high-end Disney stuff was really, really brutal on the animators, but these days it's all done with computers and there's very little, maybe the original character design, but everything else is done through CGI.
Yeah. A lot of it. I mean, I know Princess and the Frog was all hand-drawn.
Yeah. It's so brutal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we still see it because obviously in a lot of Japanese animation there's still a lot of hand-drawn stuff. Studio Ghibli do a lot of hand-drawn stuff and hand-drawn backgrounds and things.
But they ain't making movies every 2 years. It's like there's a big gaps in those, and they've got different.
Yeah, I mean Disney, at their most, and even now are releasing it every year.
Yeah.
Which is really, like you said, is brutal on the animators.
Yeah.
But I think even with animation like that, if it's quite stylized, I find this in video games. Like, I still think Grim Fandango stands up because it is so stylized, even though it was made in 1998.
Yeah. Versus
other things that are even more recent than that, where they're trying to go for a realistic look, and they just look horrible now because now we've got so much better graphics.
Yeah. Without diving too deeply, there is a certain forms of animation that don't ever sort of age, and that's claymation because it looks the same as it did then because you can't make claymation better.
You can just have better cameras, but that's the same as live action.
Yeah, and the original hand-drawn stuff. Yeah,
and I think with claymation as well, it's also, especially those Aardman stuff, it's so stylized. Like, if you showed me an Aardman character, I'd know it was an Aardman character. I've never seen them before in my life.
That's why movies that do more practical stuff are better.
Yeah.
Like, just cut the CG,
Absolutely. It's like watching the original Lord of the Rings trilogy versus a Hobbit trilogy.
Yeah.
Where there's all the prosthetics and the real effects versus all the CGI. You can tell. Yeah. Instantly.
We could have an entire episode of talking about why the differences between Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit exist. But we're not. We're talking about the eggscaping. Yeah. So yes, I think that wraps up all nicely.
Absolutely.
With a not a bow but more barbed wire bow. There we go.
Okay, so if you're looking to find us online, we're on It Takes Two Pod on Facebook, It Takes Two _pod on Instagram and on Twitter. So that's about it.
Yeah, well, we'll catch you next time. Stay safe.
Yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.